Hey everyone, in this video we're going to start talking about universalistic theories of metaethics, including ethical egoism, virtue ethics, natural law, and rights ethics. And what makes these theories universalistic theories of ethics is that whereas the relativistic theories said that what is good is relative to some individual subject or culture or to the divine will, universalistic theories claim that what is good is true for everyone in all times and in all places. Let's start with ethical egoism. Ethical egoism is the metaethical theory that every person ought to do what is in their own best rational self-interest. Now that's not the same thing as egotism, which is the disposition of a person who's arrogant, boastful, self-centered, all I care about is me. It's not that exactly. It's that I should only do, and everyone should only do, what is in their best rational self-interest. So some of the key claims of ethical egoism end up being individual happiness is the greatest moral good. People achieve their happiness by pursuing their rational self-interests, and people ought to pursue their rational self-interests. Now, ethical egoism is not the same thing as psychological egoism. Psychological egoism is the view that people do act in their own self-interests. That would be, however, some kind of observation. Ethical egoism is a prescriptive theory of metaethics saying this is what people should do. And again, what people should do is pursue their own rational self-interests. So what does it mean to pursue your own rational self-interests? It means you should only do that which is best for you. Rationally. Now, that's not the same thing as some sort of naive hedonism. I'm going to do whatever I like doing. You might want to do something that actually would not be in your rational self-interest. There might be something out there that you want to do, that you have the inclination to do, but it would not be the right thing for you to do because it would be against your rational self-interest. But according to this view, everyone ought to pursue their own rational self-interest. You should do what's best for you. Now, does that mean you don't care about other people? Well, you do, but only if they're of value to you, at least according to some ethical egoists. Now, a well-known ethical egoist who wrote in the 20th century was Ayn Rand. In fact, she wrote a book called The Virtue of Selfishness, where she says people ought to pursue their own rational self-interest because we as individuals are of supreme value to ourselves, and therefore it's good for us to pursue the propagation of ourselves. To maximize ourselves shall inevitably produce our own happiness. Now, some of the other theories that we're going to talk about, deontology, utilitarianism, virtue ethics, she's quite critical of. And she also says that laissez-faire capitalism, an economic system which is based on the pursuit of rational and prudent self-interest, individual freedom, and minimal governmental interference, in her view, is the best possible economic system and is in accordance with objectivist values. Her particular brand of ethical egoism and some of her other stuff too, her epistemology, all her thought is referred to as objectivism. Consider what she says here out of her Virtue of Selfishness. Metaphysically, life is the only phenomenon that is an end in itself, a value gained and kept by a constant process of action. Epistemologically, the concept of value is genetically dependent upon and derived from the antecedent concept of life. To speak of value as apart from life is worse than a contradiction in terms. It's only the concept of life that makes the concept of value possible. So what she's saying there is the notion of value only comes from life. Our lives, because our lives that we each individually possess are the only lives that we have. She continues, the pleasure-pain mechanism in the body of man and in the bodies of all living organisms that possess the faculty of consciousness serves as an automatic guardian of the organism's life. The physical sensation of pleasure is a signal indicating that the organism is pursuing the right course of action. The physical sensation of pain is a warning signal of danger, indicating that the organism is pursuing the wrong course of action, that something is impairing the proper function of the body, which requires action to correct it. What she's saying here is that pleasure is good and pain is bad, but more than that, it has a natural function. Pleasure is orienting you to that which is good for you, and pain is warning you that whatever you're doing is bad for you. Stop it. So consider this practically. Should I go to college? Is that in my rational self-interest? If your rational self-interest is to do something to enable you to get a career that's beneficial to you, do it. If you're doing it to please somebody else, it's not necessarily in your rational self-interest. Also, part of the cost of incurring debt and taking on student loans might make pursuing a college career not in your rational self-interest. If the debt ends up being too severe, such that you might be making a decent salary when you get out of college, but your student loan payments are so oppressive that it doesn't really matter. If that were the case, pursuing college then would be against your rational self-interest. Again, this doesn't mean that we pursue pleasure indiscriminately. For example, a completely random sexual encounter might seem like a pleasurable idea at the time, but the ramifications thereof may not be in your own rational self-interest. Yes, it might be pleasurable, but it might be disastrous. You could potentially contract some kind of disease. If you're engaging in sexual activity with someone you don't know, it might destroy relationships that you already have, especially if you're already in some kind of relationship with someone else. So just because something's pleasurable doesn't mean that it's good. Pleasure is good. It directs us, and pain also directs us away. But here, the added layer on top of it is that we need to pursue our rational self-interest. Now let's move on from talking about ethical egoism to talking about the next theory, which is virtue ethics. So there are a couple of species of virtue ethics, and I'm going to talk about two of them. One is the Greek tradition that we primarily see in Aristotle, and another one that I want to go over is the Chinese tradition that we see in Kongzi. So, some of the key claims of virtue ethics. First off, right being, or being the right kind of person, cultivating the right kind of personality, the right kind of character in virtue ethics is more important than actually the right actions that we take. A virtue in virtue ethics is a character trait or disposition to habitually act in a manner that benefits oneself and others. Excellence for society. A virtuous person, person of goodwill, is more likely to do what's right. Virtue contributes to our moral well-being as well as our happiness, which is going to be a big deal for Aristotle. And in general, for the Greeks, arete entails hitting the mean between vices of excess and vices of deficiency. So in Confucian virtue ethics, we're looking at the work of Kongzi, also known as Confucius. And what Kongzi says is there are 5 basic relationships in society. And what we ought to do to live virtuously is for us to perform each of these relationships properly. Now, he couches these relationships in masculine terms, but we could put them into non-gendered terms quite easily. But here are the 5 relationships. The relationship between father and son, elder brothers and younger brothers, older people and the youth, husbands and wives, and rulers and subjects. So a father is to love the son, but the son is to have this pious respect for the father. Older siblings are to be gentle with their younger siblings, but younger siblings are to be humble towards their older siblings. Older people are supposed to consider what the youth have to say, but the young are to defer what the elders have to say. Husbands are to be loving towards their wives, but wives are to adhere to their husbands. And rulers are to be benevolent towards their subjects, but subjects are to be loyal towards the ruler. What Kongzi basically says is that if everybody just performed these 5 relationships properly, all would be well with society. And so therefore we are to practice these roles well. If you're a son, be filially pious towards your father. And really, this relationship is the basis of all the others. If everyone just respected and honored and loved their parents in the right way, all would be well with society. A person who does this and lives in accordance with virtue is a junzi, literally a son of a master. That you want to be an honorable person. Often it's translated into English as a gentleman. Be virtuous in all your relationships. Basically, what you should do is find where you are on that list. Where am I? And do your job. On the other hand, the person who is unvirtuous is a xiaozhen, a tiny person, a little person who is incapable of virtue. Be a junzi. Don't be a xiaozhen. Live in accordance with the relationships properly and exhibit virtue, or as he calls it, de. All right, now let's take a look at Aristotle's virtue ethics. I want to start by defining some terms. First, ethos, which is character. That's being the right kind of person. Ethos, which is a habit. That's continually repeated action, doing the same thing over and over and over again, which is the root of the word ethikos, which is where we get our word ethics. Aristotle says what we want to get is a kalo ethos, a good character, to be a good person. How do we do that? Through this process. Ethizo, which is typically translated into English as habituation, the regular practice of virtuous behavior. You want to be a good person? Cultivate a good character and keep practicing doing the right thing. Do that, you will be a good person as a result. And then this is the goal of society. This is what teachers and parents and everyone in society is supposed to do, is to cultivate this good character in our citizens and in our students and in our offspring. You want good children? Teach them to be good. Continually have them practice the right action. In a sense, Aristotle's telling us practice makes perfect. You want to be a good person? You want to do good? It starts with being a good person. Now, Aristotle also wants to figure out what it is that we're after. So why do good? And he starts his book, Nicomachean Ethics, by saying this: every art and every inquiry, and similarly, every action and choice is thought to aim at some good. And for this reason, the good has rightly been declared to be that at which all things aim. So we're going after the good. What is good for us? We've already talked about options in other theories. It's whatever I think it is in subjectivism. It's whatever culture thinks it is in cultural relativism. It's whatever the divine says in divine command. And in ethical egoism, it's whatever is in my rational self-interest. What motivates us here? What are we after? Well, Aristotle has this view of what he calls the final cause. Everything for Aristotle has a final cause or a telos or a purpose. Everything's for a purpose. The purpose of this pen is to write stuff down. Now, I can do other things with it. I could throw it at somebody, but that's what it's for. The purpose of your ear, the final cause, the telos of your ear, is to pick up sound waves and hear things. The purpose of a book is to be read. For Aristotle, part of having knowledge of the world is knowing what each thing is for. Well, then we go into this question. What are human beings for? What is our function? He says the human function is to do those things which are in accordance with us being a zoon logikon, a rational animal. For Aristotle, we're not just animals. We're living things that are capable of reason. And so for us, our function is excellence. Our function is to be the best at whatever it is we're doing. And that is called arete, or virtue. We are to be good at whatever it is that we do. You want to be a baker? Be the best baker you can. You want to learn how to play an instrument? Do it well. Whatever it is that you do to the best of your ability. Since we know our function is excellence, Aristotle also gets at the fact that our final cause as human beings is eudaimonia, or what he calls happiness. Now, this doesn't mean happiness in some sort of fleeting sense of happiness, like I feel really good right now, like some sort of sense of elation. Happiness is a contentedness that comes from being the right person, having the right character, and doing the right things as a result. It's not, I did something good and I feel proud about it, or I'm happy that I have a bunch of money. In fact, you could find yourself in terrible situations that are not of your own doing, but bad things happening to you. And for Aristotle, you can still be a happy person because you have the right character. Happiness is about who you are, not what you have, nor what you're feeling. And Aristotle also says a key to that happiness is living in accordance with virtue, which is typically a mean between two vices. Let's look on the table here. The first virtue, courage. What is courage? It's a mean between two vices. Rashness is too much. Cowardice is too little. Courage is just right. Temperance, that's self-control. Licentiousness is completely going over the top all the time. Insensibility is not having any kind of fun whatsoever. Temperance is self-control. Let's take a look at one more, liberality. Let's take a look at the third one, liberality. That's being giving towards people. Someone asks for your help, you help them out. Too much? Prodigality. You have $1,000 in your bank account and some stranger says, hey, I need to borrow $1,000. And you do it, much to the chagrin of your family. On the other hand, there's illiberality, which is you don't give anything at all. You don't help anybody ever. So virtue, again, is somewhere between doing too much and doing too little. I call it the Goldilocks principle. It's being just right. So in summary, Aristotle says that we as human beings, we are after happiness. Happiness is a special state of being that we get from having the right character ready to go because we've habituated ourselves into doing the right thing that it's already there. So for Aristotle, it's our character and who we are that's most important in ethics. It's not just like, was this the right thing to do? Was this the wrong thing to do? Am I the right person? It starts with that. Everything else will then fall into place accordingly if you get that right. Let's now move on to natural law. There's a sense in which natural law ethics is also based on Aristotle to some degree. A lot of it in the Western tradition is developed by Thomas Aquinas, who himself was an Aristotelian. So let's take a look at the particulars of this view. Generally speaking, it's the notion that what is good or right is embedded in nature itself and can be apprehended with the use of reason. So a couple of key claims. For theists, God is the creator of morality. But these subsequent claims one could still affirm without being a theist or a believer in God. Morality is found in unchanging principles of moral natural law in nature. Natural law is universal and applies to all humans at all times. Humans can access natural law via the use of reason, and man-made laws are authoritative only insofar as they are just and consistent with the principles of natural law. At first, you might be thinking, this sounds like divine command theory again. It's not. Divine command theory said that whatever God says is good because he says it. This is saying that there is natural law that's just there and it's unchanging. It's not there because God says so. It's part of the cosmic order itself, and it's true for everyone. It's not just because God says so, and it's not just because God says it to me. Morality is always the same at all times and in all places. What is good is the same at all times and all places across the universe. Now here in Thomas Aquinas' Summa Theologiae, he summarizes what the natural law is. Hence, this is the first precept of law, that good is to be done and pursued, and evil is to be avoided. Do good, don't do evil. That's the starting principle. All other precepts of the natural law are based upon this. So the natural law is this notion that morality is embedded in creation. It's embedded in the universe itself. And if we just think hard enough and we use our reason, we can ascertain what it is. Now, as I mentioned earlier, Aristotle introduced the notion of teleology. Knowing what something is knowing what it's for. Thomas says we're able to figure out if some things are good or not in accordance with natural law by figuring out, is this thing being used in accordance with its end? Am I using it for what it's for? The pen is for writing. I'm writing stuff down. That's a good act. I can use my reason to figure out this is what it's for, and I'm using it for what it's for. Therefore, it's good. On the other hand, if I use the pen for something that it's not for, like trying to play it as a flute or something, that's not what it's for, and it's out of accordance with natural. That might be the wrong thing to do. So consider how natural law, based on what I just described, applies in the following situations. Consider this. What are reproductive organs for? Well, if you want to talk about it from a teleological perspective, they're for reproduction. Hence, Thomas and natural law theorists would say, if you use reproductive organs for activities that are not reproductive, that is unnatural, which for natural law theorists is the same thing as saying that it's wrong. That would mean masturbation or any kinds of non-reproductive sexual activity would be unnatural and wrong because those organs are being used out of accordance with their purpose. Also, this comes up in abortion as well. If the end or telos or purpose of a fetus is to grow, then once conception happens, it's the natural order of things for that fetus to progress. And therefore, the use of abortifacients or getting an abortion is out of accordance with the natural order as well, because it's out of accordance of the aim. The purpose of life is to grow. Stopping life from growing would be out of accordance with the natural law. That's also why homicide would be out of accordance with the natural law. The purpose of people is to live, and if you kill them, they can't do that. Now, another aspect of the natural law that persists to this day is the notion of just war theory. So in that same work, Summa Theologiae, Thomas talks about the notion of a just war, and he gives some principles to guide us as to what makes war good, that are in accordance with natural law. Now, these notions of a just war in natural law persist today in international affairs and also come up as ethical concerns in the manufacturing of certain weapons, whether they be nuclear, biological, or even conventional. The ethics here would even include stuff like about drone attacks. Here's the principles for a just war. Who can declare war? Who can go to war? Not just anybody. I can't just decide to go to war with my neighbor. Principle number 1, war has to be waged by a legitimate authority. It can't just be anyone. For it's not the business of a private individual to declare war. You can go to court. You have a problem with your neighbor? You can go to court. You can sue. You don't have to go, I declare war on your neighbor. Moreover, it's not the business of a private individual to summon together the people. You can't call up the militia. And, as the care of the commonweal, or as we would say today, the commonwealth, is committed to those who are in authority, it is their business to watch over the commonweal of the city, kingdom, or province subject to them. What this means is that it's the job of rulers to make sure that their people are protected, preserved, and defended. So you as a private individual shouldn't have to worry about going to war with your neighbor, because the people in charge should be taking care of it if there's a problem. Principle number 2, a just cause is required, namely that those who are attacked should be attacked because they deserve it on account of some fault. So, in a just war, you can't just decide to declare war on somebody because you want to. There has to be a reason for it, and he gives us a list. A just war is wont to be described as one that avenges wrongs, so it has to fix some sort of problem. When a nation or state has to be punished, so some nation has done something bad and that needs to be rectified and pushed back. For refusing to make amends for wrongs inflicted by its subjects, the people of a country keep attacking others, and so other countries warn them, if you keep doing this, we're going to do something about it, and to restore what has been seized unjustly. So it's wrong to just go in and take other people's stuff. Third aspect. It is necessary that the belligerents, that is, the people going to war, should have a rightful intention, so that they intend the advancement of good or the avoidance of evil. He quotes Augustine here. The passion for inflicting harm, the cruel thirst for vengeance, an unpacific and relentless spirit, the fever of revolt, the lust of power, and such like things, all these are rightly condemned in war. If you're going to war, what are you there for? The advancement of good. The purpose of war is for peace. It's to fix the problems addressed in the second criteria for going to war, not merely to be something enjoyed for its own sake. The people that go into war need to go into it with an attitude of we are here to do good, not, as he says, for motives of aggrandizement or cruelty, but with the object of securing peace. This gets collapsed into what you see here. These two separate notions of jus ad bellum, what do you do before you go to war, and jus in bello, how you should act during war. And so this is a checklist to see, do you have a just war? In summary, war must be declared and waged by legitimate authority. There must be a just cause for going to war. War must be the last resort. That means you can't just decide to go to war with somebody at the first sign of a problem. There must be a reasonable prospect of success, and the violence used must be proportional to the wrong being resisted. Oh, they sunk one of our boats?
Let's nuke the whole country.
No. And then also in war, non-combatants should not be intentionally targeted. The tactics used must be in proportion to the injury being redressed. And also, prisoners of war must be treated humanely. So if someone surrenders, you accept their surrender, and you are hospitable to them. Now this is just war theory, but just war theory is a part of natural law theory. And some of these rules end up manifesting themselves in the 20th century in, say, the Geneva Conventions or the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. But in order to get there, we need to take a look at rights ethics. So just as natural law kind of grew out of virtue ethics, rights ethics kind of grows out of natural law ethics. So here are the key claims of natural rights ethics. They're come out of our human nature, which for some is a special creation of God. That is, they're just there. They're God-given. You'll hear that expression, God-given rights. Humans have rights. You might be thinking, what about animal rights? Well, at least on this view, it's the view that inanimate objects don't have rights. Like a building does not have a right or something like that. Also on this view, rights are self-evident and inalienable. That is, they're obvious and they can't be taken away. And you don't have to qualify to earn these rights. These are not rights that you gain. They're inherent. And rights exist independently and prior to duties. So again, you don't have to sign up for them. You've got them anyway. Now, there's a couple of different types of rights. Natural rights, also called negative rights because they can't be taken away, are the rights that you're born with. They're the ones that are sometimes called the God-given rights. These are not conferred. They are just there. So consider, for example, the language of the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. We would say inalienable today. That among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Or consider the words here of the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen, kind of the French Revolution equivalent of the Declaration of Independence. The aim of all political association is the preservation of the natural and imprescriptible rights of man. These rights are liberty, property, security, and resistance to oppression. Now, that's one species of rights. Now, for rights theorists, those are there. They can't be taken away. They're imbued into part of the human personality and character. Those aren't the only kind of rights. So positive rights are rights that are conferred, sometimes by the state, but also by some other kind of entity. Consider, for example, the rights of the First Amendment. These are not negative rights. These are positive rights. Now, I say this because I've heard people say sometimes there's a God-given right to the Second Amendment. That's not a God-given right. That's a congressionally given right. Life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, those natural rights, those are ones that are quote-unquote God-given. The Bill of Rights are ones that are conferred by Congress. So like I said, consider the text of the First Amendment. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or of the right of people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. Notice there, Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech. If your workplace censors you, that's not a violation of the First Amendment. Now, if Congress makes a law to censor you, that is a violation of the First Amendment. Now, talking about how these are positive rights, things that are given to you, consider that when you graduate with a degree from this institution, you're going to get a slip of paper called a diploma, which says on there, this degree has been granted to so-and-so with all the rights and privileges appertaining thereto. Now you have the rights that come with a degree, whatever those are. You've got them. But they were conferred to you upon the completion of the degree. You didn't have them when you applied for college. You can't say, oh, I applied for college. Now I have a bachelor's degree. No, you don't. You have to earn that degree, and then once you've got it, then you've got all the rights and privileges appertaining there too. Then we can move on to the notion of welfare rights. Welfare rights are kind of like positive rights plus. They're things that are conferred to you, but that are considered decent. This is from Section 22 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Everyone, as a member of society, has the right to Social Security and is entitled to realization through national effort and international cooperation in accordance with the organization and resources of each state of the economic, social, and cultural rights indispensable for his dignity and the free development of his personality. Now, one critic of the notion of natural rights would be Karl Marx, who says what these natural rights, all this stuff for life, liberty, and property, the talk of those God-given rights, really all that does is benefits people who already own a lot of property or land. And it really just benefits the upper classes. Lower class people who don't really have the same amount of property don't really get to enjoy this as much. So these natural rights really end up protecting the life, liberty, and happiness of the rich. For the lower classes, rights are an illusion that we think that we have or that we're entitled to that gives us some sense of dignity, but actually it ends up working in subservience to the powers that be. Now also consider, when it comes to rights theory, the work of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Now, King said this in his letter from Birmingham jail. An unjust law is a code that a majority inflicts on a minority that is not binding on itself. This is difference made legal. On the other hand, a just law is a code that the majority compels a minority to follow and that is willing to follow itself. This is sameness made legal. It is implicit herein, based upon this, that certain rights are warranted that are predicated upon natural law truths. And notice there that Dr. King just said these notion of rights are actually predicated upon natural law. A just law is a man-made code that squares with the moral law or the law of God. An unjust law is a code that is out of harmony with the moral law. An unjust law is a human law that is not rooted in eternal and natural law. So there, what King is saying is, when it comes to laws, and he's talking there, of course, about segregation laws that are out of accordance with the natural order, he says that segregation basically ends up dehumanizing personality, which is out of accordance with what human beings are for. So he's channeling natural law, but the result is that based on natural law, certain rights come as results from that. That because natural law exists, that entails that there's certain rights that we possess and have, and what segregation ends up doing is denying those rights to people that absolutely possess them. So this is the first wave of looking at some universalistic theories of ethics. What I'll be doing in the next video is we'll be looking at some other universalistic theories of ethics that remain, namely deontology and utilitarianism.